in this geopolitical shifting world, what would you say would be the key reasons why the USA need to, for their own sake, keep a good relationship with South Africa? What's in it for the USA in terms of this whole geopolitical shift? What do we offer them?
Yes, I think South Africa is still the gateway to the rest of Africa. If you talk to American companies, which I do regularly, they do believe, despite everything that happened in terms of weakening infrastructure, corruption, and other challenges in South Africa, that the best way to do business in Africa is still from South Africa. That is why 600 American companies do business in South Africa, with a very strong focus mostly in expanding their African footprint. Now, the reality is that Africa as a continent is still experiencing a population boom. By 2050, a quarter of the world population will live on the African continent. Last year, we saw that 14 of the 20 fastest growing economies in the world were on the African continent. And if America, which is the biggest economy in the world, the American companies that want to expand their footprint in the rest of the world, if they want to do that in Africa, they cannot turn their backs on South Africa.
The question in my mind when I saw you at the podium of the briefing room in the White House was, why would the doors of the White House go open to solidarity? And I would imagine, unless to, it will appear, Cyril Ramaphosa. And let me qualify my question. Why would the White House open its doors to a movement that really represent only roughly about 6% of South Africa's unionized workers?
Well, on President Ramaphosa, I must comment on that. In that sense, I think it is, in a sense, sad, the state of South Africa's diplomatic service at the moment and our diplomatic relations. President Ramaphosa requested a meeting with President Trump at the UN. That didn't happen, but they created the perception in the South African media that it will happen. I can also tell you I was at the State Department, and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, declined to meet at the UN with Minister Ronald Lamola, and Mr. Lamola had to meet with the Deputy Secretary of State. So the Americans are sending a message to South Africa. We haven't appointed an ambassador. We've been without an ambassador in Washington now for more than 6 months. Our diplomatic service is at a really low point. There was different government delegations in Washington over the last 2 weeks. They don't speak from the same position. They don't have the same mandate. They clearly don't have a clear mandate on what they can negotiate about. So there's a very low level of trust within the Trump administration at the moment towards the South African government. That became very clear. I've met with all those people. I've met with a person second in charge at the State Department, directly working daily with Minister Marco Rubio. So that's sad. We must all be worried about that as patriotic people loving South Africa. That's alarming because we have a serious political crisis at the moment in the relationship between the two countries.
Yeah. Jaco, you've just said something now that I think would really peeve off a lot of people within at least the African National Congress government in South Africa. You also said, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you get direct requests from the White House to solidarity. I mean, that's quite something. And let me add this here. I didn't do much research, but I saw that you had a meeting with a man called Brendan McNamara, who has previously worked for the US Africa Command. He's joined Trump's National Security Council as Africa Director. These are not unimportant people. These are very serious people. Is this not risky business as well for you? Because I just see the Minister of Police and the Minister of Foreign Affairs in South Africa sort of expressing their displeasure with your activities.
Yeah, they're very unhappy. Minister Lamola even attacked me directly on X. He quoted one of my tweets, and he He quoted that and attacked me. And there's a strange perception that the South African government has a monopoly on foreign relations. That's crazy, you know. I mean, there's no government in the world has a monopoly on foreign relations. If you visit Washington, there's delegations from South Africa every week in Washington. People from different business groups, from different political parties, from different organizations. And that is the case for countries all over the world. There's lobbyists in Washington, hundreds and hundreds of lobbyists. You know, now we have a principle at Solidarity that we don't work with lobbyists. We've never ever used any lobbyists. We built our own direct relations with people in politics. But yes, interestingly enough, the government is unhappy. I think they must just read again our documents, and they're willing. They can talk to us about that, but they can also talk to anyone that we meet with about our agenda, because they may misunderstand our agenda, because our agenda is not one of in any way damaging South Africa or the relationship between South Africa and the US. It's rather to find ways to fix that. We've reached out twice to President Ramaphosa directly and asked him to work together, that we and the South African government and business must work together to approach the American government. There were people in the ANC who tried to facilitate that. There were people in business in South Africa who tried to facilitate that. But people in the government decided they're not going to work with us. Now, I'm not then going to sit back and see how 30% tariffs destroy the livelihoods of many South Africans. So, yeah, it's a dangerous business. We get threats all of the time, but we can't sit idle and wait for this situation just to play out by itself.
Yeah, yeah. Your words, you say the White House is clearly frustrated with the South African government. Concluding a trade agreement is within reach, you say, but the South African government lacks the political will. Now, once again, explain that to me.
Yes.
If you say
So,
the South African government, I beg your pardon, is lacking the will, what are you talking about specifically?
the Americans want a good relationship with South Africa and they want a trade agreement. That's different from, say, their relationship with Venezuela or Iran or countries like that. They don't want to do business with those countries. They want to do business with South Africa. So they're willing to really give us a good deal. When they say us, South Africa, the Americans are very, very much willing to broaden South Africa's access to the American market, get much more investments from America in the South African economy. And we need that. South Africa lost billions of dollars of foreign direct investments over the last 5-6 years. That's an enormous challenge. If you look at the mining industry, there's nearly no new mines being built in South Africa. The mining infrastructure is old because the foreign investments are pulled out of the South African economy. We don't get new investments. So the Americans look at that and they say, we will put a good deal on the table, but they have a few very simple demands. And those demands were communicated to South Africa in February. It was communicated to President Ramaphosa during his visit in May. It was communicated to Parkstown, Ronald Lamola, all these delegations. First place, they need to know that their property rights will be guaranteed and there will not be expropriation without any compensation. The second and the third requests are very easy. President Ramaphosa must just say that he must take a person himself as president a strong position against singing of Kill the Boers, to say, well, he discouraged that. He don't want people to do that. He's not doing that at the moment. He's sending out other ministers to do that. But we need the president to say, stop with singing Kill the Boer. The farm tax must be declared a priority crime. That's very easy. There's many priority crimes in South Africa. Rhino poaching is a priority crime. Crime in the Cape Flats is a priority crime. Why can't farm tax be a priority crime? The third thing that they are demanding is that South Africa must affirm that racial laws are not permanent. And we've spoken, the White House had very good questions on that, because South Africa is not acting in accordance with the United Nations at the moment in terms of things like BEE and affirmative action. It's becoming permanent in South Africa, and you're not allowed to have permanent racial discrimination in any country. So they're asking for certain exceptions for American companies. And lastly, a neutral foreign policy. South Africa must just affirm that. They don't have to do something. They must affirm to the Americans, listen, yes, we will look again at our foreign policy and try to be more neutral, something that the South Africans didn't do. If South Africa do something on those 5 points, then you can have a very good trade deal.
Jaco, the word that must have been used by you the last couple of days, the one word probably obviously is trade agreement,
Yes.
tariffs. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not as smart as you are, and don't know much about how the economy works. But my simple question: what sort of trade, what sort of tariff do you think would be a reasonable, and I would call it a win-win,
Yeah.
to use Trump terms now, and I think that's part of the question is what would be for the Trump administration, what would be a win-win a tariff, and why does it seem like the Ramaphosa government is not able to achieve
Yeah.
such an agreement?
Yes, so I think that tariff will be one that makes South African products competitive in the American market. We must first acknowledge that the time of zero tariffs is gone. As long as Trump is in the White House, we will not go back to the great position that we had for 25 years of more than 1,000 South African products being exported to America with zero tariffs. That will not happen in the next 3.5 years. Again, so what will be a tariff that will still make South African products competitive? And then you need to look at the tariffs on products from our main competitors. South Africa compete very strongly with South American countries in the American market. Let's take one industry, and remember we have broad exports to America, but take one industry that is simple to explain, and that is agriculture. Our agricultural exports to America include things like citrus, wines, nuts, some other products. And we compete with Chile, Peru, Argentina, Brazil, those countries. Most of them currently have a 15% tariff. We have a 30% tariff. So ours is double theirs at the moment. And that means that South African exports is not competitive at the moment. So by the middle of next year, when we will have big citrus exports to, again, hopefully to America, we can't have a 30% tariff, because then the Americans will rather decide to buy citrus from Chile and Peru and these other countries. So I think a 15% tariff is good. That's what we've proposed to the Trump administration. We've asked them to lower it at least on certain industries, like the car manufacturing, the auto industry, textiles, one or two other manufacturing industries, and then agriculture, which is for us as an organization very important. But I think what is also important is to say that our proposal is focused very much on what can be achieved without a trade agreement between South Africa and America. We believe that the South African government is failing at the moment to achieve that trade agreement. Like I've said, there were 2 or 3 different delegations in Washington. They all talk from different positions. I don't think there's a clear mandate that's determined, and that's the problem with the big challenges within the ANC. The tension within the ANC, the different factions, all of that you have there. So that's a big problem. So what can you achieve without a trade agreement? You can get an executive order from the White House to lower tariffs in certain areas. You can have certain plans implemented by the American government to support certain industries that were hit very hard by this tariffs at the moment. So we're working on a number of plans with the Trump administration for the short term, at least, while there's still not a proper trade agreement in place.
I want to go through just a short list of the big headaches that we talk
Yes.
about in South Africa. Just before that, are you also talking to the Americans about the possibility of exonerating US companies from BEE legislation? Is
Yes.
that something that is on the table?
Yes, it is. It absolutely. It's something that's on the table. That's something that the Americans put on the table, and we've included that in our proposals. Now you can say, why in the world, do you do that? Because what about South African companies? And we say that we believe that that can be the beginning of something greater, because we need to start talking about the end of BEE, the phasing out of these racial laws. And we know that if the Americans get that, the Europeans will ask for the same. And at the end, somehow, we can get a phasing out of some of these laws. These laws make it very difficult for American companies to invest in South Africa. There's many American companies who want to invest much more in the South African economy, but BEE laws make it just too expensive for them at the moment. It adds about 30% costs to their business, because they need to get a local BEE partner in South Africa who needs to own 30% of the company, and the cost of all of that just doesn't make sense. And then you get a scenario where American companies open African offices in Kigali, in Rwanda, Nairobi, in Kenya, Dakar, in Senegal. We saw that in the last year or two. I'm alarmed by that. I'm really concerned about that, because I still believe that South Africa is the best place in Africa to do business with from an American perspective. So, yeah, I think that's very strongly part of the proposal.
My next question regarding Black economic empowerment is a little bit more nuanced. I'd like you to tell me, or give me an idea, an impression of how do the Americans view BEE in South Africa. I know we talk about it and we see it as race discrimination. That's one of the arguments in South Africa, but the USA has had its own form of affirmative action for something like 60 years or something like that. I think it
Yeah.
started in the Kennedy years. How do
Yes.
they view Black economic empowerment? And I suppose the question at the end of the day, do you fight for the total elimination of these laws, or are we talking about restructuring or rewriting the laws in ways in which it still makes sense to have some form of what the Americans would call affirmative action going into the future in South Africa? So is it an absolute scrapping and get rid of it, or are we saying, you know what, phase it out perhaps, or we can still in certain sectors apply it under the general morality
Yeah.
idea of
Yeah.
affirmative action?
Yeah, we don't work in a perfect world, Solidarity work with the realities of South Africa, and that's sometimes something that I must remind people of, because I get confronted sometimes by people who say, well, why don't you just demand for an end of BEE? I say, well, I work with the reality. We work with other trade unions, organizations. We work with the government. We know that's not possible. So, yeah, we're very much in favor of a phasing out of BEE laws over time, and at least also to prove to the South African population of the benefits, economic benefits, when
Yeah.
you phase out BEE laws, because there will be great economic benefits. That's the Americans agree with us on that. The Americans feel very strong about South African BEE laws. In America, it was to the benefit of a small minority.
Yeah.
You can't uplift an 80%, 82% majority by
Yeah.
BEE laws. It's not possible. So they understand that argument very strongly, and that is why they talk so much about it with their when they negotiate with the South African government. I can confirm that with you. That was very much part of the agenda the last 2-3 weeks when they when they spoke with us, but also when they spoke with the South African government.
Yeah. Next one on my list, expropriation without compensation. Obviously, that's on the table as well. I just want to get the US view on that, and then I would just rephrase it on land reform in South Africa. What is their view on the subject?
Yes, I mean, America is one of the countries in the world with the strongest view on property rights. The whole American dream is built on property rights. Americans will tell you when you talk about the American economic success story, they will tell you, well, the first base of it is property rights. So they're very concerned about the bill that President Ramaphosa signed end of last year on the expropriation without compensation, and they want some kind of assurance that there will not be expropriations with zero compensation. Now, the problem with that is that we saw 2 weeks ago the announcement of the first expropriation process east of Johannesburg, where there will be zero compensation of agricultural land. That process has started. It's the Ekurhuleni municipality who started it. So that's really alarming. The Americans all know about it. They tell us about it. So they're very, very concerned about it. And I think President Ramaphosa needs to address this. The problem is he stays silent. His negotiating teams don't talk about it. They don't bring anything to the table. Currently, they have no proposal to the Americans about that. And I can't see a trade agreement happening between the two countries without some kind of assurance on property rights.
Yeah. When we talk about, I want to talk about land reform. I want to talk about it in that context now.
Yeah.
Do the Americans see, understand, acknowledge that there should be something like land reform? What is your story to the Americans that land reform is a done deal? It's already done. It's all okay. It's a headache of the history that we've worked on. Uh, what is the view of solidarity, I guess, to the Americans? Have we done enough in terms of land reform? Are we satisfied where we are at the moment with land reform? And I'm not talking about the extreme guys now, go back colonials and all that,
Yeah.
you're still land kind of nonsense and so on. But what is the realistic picture that you are conveying to the Americans, and how do they respond to it? What is their input on it?
Yes. Yes, yes. No, so I think I think there's quite agreement between us, our organizational viewpoint, and the American government on this. And that is, yeah, you can just look at the track record of the last, say, 25 to 30 years. And that is where land reform took place, where successful farms were bought at market value and were given to people with the correct training, access to capital, and with a good relationship with other farmers who have the knowledge, then you can have successful land reform. If you simply take farms from commercial successful farms and you give it to people without the knowledge, access to capital, the potential to be a commercial farmer, you have all these examples of failed land reform. There's more than 800 examples in South Africa of farms bought by the South African government. They just given to black communities, and yeah, there's nothing left. They just sell off everything on the farms that they can sell off. It becomes completely economically inactive, and that's a great loss in a country where we have a very high population where we need to feed. So I think again. We want to take out the populist kind of rhetoric in terms of land reform and say that it must be easy and easier for black farmers to be successful commercial farmers in South Africa. We want to see more success stories of more successful black commercial farmers being really successful, increasing their capital value. You're not going to do that the way it's been done the last 25 to 30 years. You're simply not going to do that by expropriating land from current farmers, because that will lead to financial crisis in South Africa in the banking sector. It will lead to a credit crisis, to very high inflation. That will destroy the agricultural sector like it happened in Zimbabwe. The Americans are very, very much aware of how things went wrong in Zimbabwe.
Jaco, a little bit my last question, or moving that direction. I know it's early in the morning there, and you've got probably a very busy schedule ahead of you. And thank you very much for this time you're giving me. Farmer tax. I personally have talked to a number of victims of farmer tax lately. I'm personally very deeply touched by this, and I want to do more around this theme as well. So my question is a little bit nuanced. South African government has created the National Rural Safety Strategy. They've not explicitly designated farmer tax as a standalone priority crime. In your view, has government done enough? Are they doing enough? That's part of the question. And the second part of the question is, how do the Americans look at this? I'm sure that you guys must have jubilated when you heard the court results with Julius Malema. But how do the Americans look at it in terms of the words that Trump spoke, the genocide that he talked about some time ago? What is their perception among those of the Republican Party that you sit around the table with? And do they genuinely believe that there's some form of a genocide going on in South Africa? So it's two questions,
Yeah.
really.
Yes, I think the first thing is that what's important is that there was last year less farm murders in South Africa than the year before, not because the government did anything, but because organizations like AfriForum and others do much more. They implement safety strategies in more and more South African communities, train people, activate systems, use technology to better improve the safety in rural areas, help farmers to get the necessary safety training and to implement technology on their farms to improve their own safety. That is why, to be honest with you, we had last year more farm attacks than in 2023, but less murders. People can fight back, and when a farm attack happens, there is a team of trained people who can react quickly. That has nothing to do with anything that the government did. The South African police force don't act on farm attacks. We actually see more and more problems in terms of the immediate reaction after a farm attack, the lack in seriousness that they take in not only that immediate reaction to when a farm attack happens, but also efforts to prosecute farm murderers. You know, that's why more than 70% of the cases, no one is ever prosecuted. So we have a serious problem in terms of the will, the political will, but also the practical will in the police service, in the prosecuting authority, and in government to deal with this problem. I think the Americans are very aware of that. That is fascinating to see how much they are aware of that in terms of what the presidency. You know that we've never referred as Solidarity or AfriForum. We never used the term genocide. I think that what we must understand is that the American president used that word from a different perspective, in a different term. He sees this as a bigger problem of a broad attack on a minority in South Africa who are slowly but surely pushed out. You know, so he sees that in a context of making it more and more difficult for minorities to survive in South Africa. And that's why he used that word. In the South African context, we don't use that word because it has a different meaning, I think, in South Africa. And we just simply talk about the realities that we and our members experience. We as the Solidarity Movement, and especially AfriForum, spent millions and millions of rands in trying to improve rural safety. And we hope that the Americans will support us on that. I think there's great proposals at the moment on the table for America to financially also support these efforts.
If I can go back to this question just for one moment, or we'll go a little bit deeper in this, which is when you shake hands for the first time with somebody in America and say, this is Jaco Kleynhans, he's from Solidarity, he's from South Africa. Do the Americans look at you, and is that part of the discussion immediately, the land, the place of the genocide, in the minds of the average American, in the hands that you shake?
Yeah, it changed immensely in just a year's time. I've been driving through America with a car for many, many years on every visit. And in the past, people rarely knew anything about what's happening in South Africa. Now, if you stop at a filling station, a petrol station, or like they say, a gas station here in America, and you buy a cool drink, people will talk to you about farm murders. They're all aware of that. They're all aware of Kill the Boer, what Malema sang. Every single American knows about that. Last week, I got into an Uber taxi, and the taxi driver was from Turkish descent. He's been living for 5 years in America, in Washington, D.C. And the first thing He asked me, "What's your accent?" I said, "South African." He said, "I know about the farmers getting killed in South Africa." That's a Turkish guy living in Washington, D.C. He was really concerned about farmers in South Africa. I think that's great news. There's a very, very high level of awareness now in America. We need to send that energy now in the right direction. It's not only good if people are angry or so. We must get people to become, and the American government to become practically involved in finding solutions.
I'm really out of time. Just very briefly, your visit is post Charlie Kirk,
Yeah.
the horror story. Has that changed the character, the mood in the country? Is it
Yeah.
something that everybody is talking about still? And
Yes. Yeah. 3 weeks later, people are still talking about it. There's a general fear in America for violence. Americans talk about their fear for more violence in future. They're really worried that it can get out of control, in a place where people just start to use much higher levels of violence. So that's a real concern. I think there's a discussion, a debate here in America about the future of this country. So that's the very negative side. The positive side is that there's a movement amongst young men to send energy in the right direction, because you can have energy really used for a very negative kind of purpose. But
yeah,
there's many organizations, and also like Charlie Kirk's organization, Turning Point USA, who try to channel the energy in a more positive direction. And America has the potential as a country to do the right thing. I think it may go in the right direction. But yes, it's fascinating to see how the death of Charlie Kirk changed the political dialogue in America.
I want to close this discussion with showing the viewers that lovely photograph of Jaco in the briefing room in the White House. Just tell me about that moment,
Yes.
Jaco, and I will let you go and finish your breakfast or do what you need to do.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting that you're not allowed to take pictures in the White House. You must give in your cell phone. And that's the case for anyone. The South African ministers who went with President Ramaphosa in May also had to give in their cell phones. So you're not allowed to take pictures in the Oval Office except the media. Only the media may take pictures in the White House. But the one place where you are allowed to take pictures is the media briefing room. So I at least got a picture. That's the only picture I got from within the West Wing of the White House, there where all the action is happening. I would have loved a picture in the Oval Office because that's quite something.
Yeah.
But yes, at least I got this picture in the briefing room during my meeting there.
Jaco, your kids must be proud as what it. Fantastic.
They
Thank you.
absolutely enjoy it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Jaco Kleynhans, Head of International Relations for Solidarity Movement. Thank you very much. It's always really a great pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.